make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Regardless of when this goes into effect, it's going to be really hard to train people on this. Like, it's going to be hard to train voters to know that they need to bring these things when they register to vote because they haven't needed to before. The only state right now that requires that in any capacity is Arizona for statewide races. And it's taken them a really long time to educate voters and get them up to speed and registered in the way that we would expect.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by my brother from another mother, your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. What's up, Josh?
What's going on, Will?
All right, I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks for asking. And we are joined once again by my sister from another mister, Jessica Huseman, who is the Editorial Director of VoteBeat, which is a nonpartisan local reporting outlet that focuses on elections and voting. And we are just so glad to have Jessica back because she is just so smart and awesome. So welcome back to Faithful Politics.
Oh.
I know. And
it was lovely.
I would vote for brisket ribs 2020.
I absolutely would. Can we do brisket ribs 2028?
That is the t-shirt.
It might actually win.
For your listeners, it says brisket ribs 2020.
Yeah,
it was like a lymphoma fundraiser. But anyway.
How much did it raise? I hope billions. Billions?
I'm not
billions.
My engagement with that effort, started and stopped at purchasing this shirt.
Yeah.
So, while I wish them success, I have no.
Yes. Hey, all of us have. We can't all care about everything equally, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just one non-serious question before we actually get into the serious question. What is the brisket situation in Texas? Because I have had brisket in just about every state in the country. Kansas City is pretty tight.
Had it in Texas?
Hmm?
You have? Okay.
Well, of course, I know that restaurants do vary.
Restaurants do vary. You've got to go to a good one. Briskets are really hard to smoke Texas style, even though that's like pride and joy. A couple of Christmases ago, I got my dad a brisket making course. So he showed up to a brewery at 9 a.m. and there was amazing. A man in gloves, let's cook meat. I will say, I thought his briskets were good before, but they're way better now that
nice.
That course.
Do you know anywhere in Houston? I'm going to be in Houston next week.
Oh my God. If you just Google brewery brisket,
done
classes, they're everywhere. There's one at a brewery basically every weekend in Dallas.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's all the time we have. So thanks.
Let's go get something to eat. I'm freaking starving now somehow.
I know. Well, okay. So before we get started, give us kind of just like a 30,000 foot view of, all the stuff that VoteBeat is doing up to, and then we can kind of narrow down to some of the more specific topics that we have planned.
Yeah. So we cover election administration and voting policy, which is a pretty narrow scope of things to cover in all of the things that make up national politics. But right now, we're really focused on the impending primary season and the sort of javelins that Trump continues to throw into it by issuing various, requests and decrees. Whether or not they actually filter down to voting policy, right? They still cause a lot of confusion. So the Texas primary is next week, and I will be staying up all night long in Gillespie County, Texas. Oh, I've got my two little dogs are walking around and back. So sorry if that's distracting. But anyway, I will be up all night in Gillespie County, Texas, which is in Texas wine country, small.
Okay.
There. Because the Republicans there are choosing to hand count all of the ballots in the county. Well, for the Republicans, which is a really bad idea because they don't trust the machines. They did this last year as well, and they made a lot of mistakes, and I was up all night then too. But a second county has now followed their lead, Eastland County, which is like a little bit west. And they're still training volunteers even today. So we'll see if they ever finish counting. I'm not sure that they will.
Yeah. So Texas is one state that's redistricting. There are some others that are also redistricting. You mentioned we have a primary coming up this year, but you also wrote an article recently that talked about like just the election workers that have to like work the election. Like, are we even ready for the primaries?
You know what? I think we're gonna be. There's some real challenges. I think the article you're probably referring to, which your listeners should go and read, because I think it was really well done. It was out of Wisconsin, and it was in a town called the town of Wausau. Wisconsin's got this pretty bad because they require so many election administrators. Like most of us live in states where there's one election administrator. And most of us live in cities where the election administrator only administers elections and is pretty okay paid for doing that job, because most people live in medium to big size cities, like population wise. So most people are not having this problem. The people that are having this problem are rural communities, and especially in places like Wisconsin, because instead of administering elections on the county level, they administer at the smallest space in government. So every town, municipality, and city has to have their own election administrator. So in a town like the town of Wausau, it sits in the county of Marathon. It's not a big county. There are like 120,000 people in it. They need 61 election administrators for that.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. Other counties of that size need one. And so
what would Minneapolis need?
One. They have one. They
Okay.
have that one person has deputies, right? But they're serving a much larger population, like per clerk, than these small towns in Wisconsin. And so when one leaves, you have to recruit from inside of the town. You can't hire someone from outside of the town.
These are just rules that they have.
Right.
That they've come up with because they're concerned about election integrity?
Well, no, these have actually been on the books forever, right?
Oh, okay.
So
they're just complicated.
They're complicated, and they're also rooted in a time in which, like, the laws that I'm talking about here are passed in, like, the 1800s. So we're talking about a time in which people lived and worked in the town that they were in, right? That churches were full. Communities like worked differently than they do now, right? Like there are arguments to be made about whether that's good or bad, but like it is simply very different. And so where there used to be like a very engaged town in the town of Wausau with people who were like farming there and selling their goods there and talking to their neighbors there and going to church there, the town is now a commuter town for larger towns near it. And it's also only got 2,000 people in it. So that's a pretty small population, and the job doesn't pay well. And it doesn't pay well anywhere, right? Like the things that we are asking these people to do and the attitudes we're expecting them to put up with all day long do not justify the like $60 an hour that we pay them to do this work. So yeah, I mean, like recruitment is hard, and it gets harder the smaller your community is and the more restrictive the laws around who can do that work become, right? So if you're in a small town in a state with pretty restrictive hiring laws, you're up a creek, right? I think if you're in a city like mine, Dallas, right, where it's a huge city, we have one election administrator. That person exists only to administer and think about elections in the county, and they're paid more than $100,000 a year, right? Like that's a position that's always going to be filled.
Sure.
It's the smaller ones in smaller places that I think are going to struggle. And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, that sounds really problematic. And And, we see this like image and this vision, right, that you're painting on the local level, especially in some of these small towns. And like, I just go in, I go to my school, someone's there, they've been there since 6 a.m. and I go vote and I say, hey, thanks so much. And they're like, you interested in helping? I'm like, no, I'll see you later. And then, because I don't want to sit there for like, 12 hours or whatever they get paid, and like Chick-fil-A nuggets and whatever. So it's like, I think they get some compensation.
They get some, but not a lot.
But I'm also in Henrico County, Virginia, which is like, Henrico County has a lot. It has money, right? So it's like, so anyway. But you see this kind of like on this micro level. But I want to think about for a minute, move to the federal for a second, and see if you can help us make some sense of the SAVE Act. Yeah. So we have the SAVE Act, and I'll have you kind of define it, but it passed, just so our audience knows, it's about, I guess the whole thing is to make something, I had it in front of me, but then I lost it, to save something about election, something, safety again, Save America. But anyway, so it passed on February 11th of this month, and I would just love for you to kind of, the House, yes, it hasn't been going into law. That's very important. And we don't know if it's going to pass the Senate. What is the SAVE Act? President Trump's been talking about it. What's going on? And why should we care about it? Should we want it to pass? Should we not want it to pass? What's going on?
Yeah, okay. So SAVE is an acronym, like all things, and it stands for the Safeguard American, well, hold on, I have it here. I want to get exactly right because I think it's important. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act.
Boom. There you go.
Yeah. So that's a lot of words. It doesn't mean a lot, but, I think voter eligibility is the thing here, right? So what they're going after is making sure that you, American, are eligible to vote in the way that you say that you are eligible to vote. So are you a citizen of the United States? Do you live where you say that you live? That's the kind of thing that this act concerns itself with, right? And in sort of getting closer to those goals, it does a couple of things. First, it will require documentary proof of citizenship. So when you and I go to the DMV, we register to vote because we are checking a box as we are filling out our driver's license renewal form or whatever we're doing there. It's as easy as that, right? And and up to now, that is how the federal government has approached voter registration. It has entered lawsuits because states have imposed additional barriers beyond the requirements on the federal form, which are very basic, and has typically lost, right? This would be a real departure from the federal government's traditional approach to how easy it should be to register to vote. And so instead of the box, you would have to present a passport or a birth certificate or a number of other documents that not everybody has, but each could be used to prove citizenship at the point of registration. And if you are already registered to vote, the next time you interact with the system in any way, you would be required to produce that proof, right? So you wouldn't have to go back and register all over again. But if you changed anything or you moved, or, you wanted to update your party affiliation with your county, for example, you would then have to come with your proof of citizenship. So that's the biggest and first thing that it does. It also would require voter identification, proof, like photo ID at the polls, which many Americans support and is required in many states. I think that it really comes down to the types of documents you say you can use and the ways and what happens if somebody doesn't happen to have one, right? Like it's not necessarily ID, like the idea of voter ID, but sort of the mechanism by which we enforce it and which IDs we decide are valid and which we don't. That the debate lies there. And so those are, I think the two biggest things that people are talking about related to this.
Yeah. I think probably one of the questions I have, and I only have it based on, I think probably one of the first times that we spoke when you were really like, I mean, you were basically proselytizing for people to volunteer at voting at polling places. I don't really know how else to categorize it. But like, if this were to go into effect, like, or, signed into law, so it's February, end of February as we're recording this, if it goes into motion, like, would election workers be able to get the training, the materials, like everything they need to actually like implement this for the midterms?
Well, I think that, so chiefly I should say, I think this basically has no chance of passing whatsoever in the United States Senate. And so I think the likelihood that we need to grapple with that question on the ground is probably really low. I would imagine that they would also, in the event that this did pass, it would pass so close to the midterms that there's just no way that it could actually go into practice prior to. And there's a lot of, and so what I suspect was that if this were to pass in some mythical world in which the politics look better for it now than they do, they would probably throw the enforcement deadline out until the next federal election, at least. If they didn't, we would have a real calamity on our hands. And I think like one thing about federal elected officials that they are self-interested and they are all running in races that are all going to be on the ballot in November. So they don't have any self-interest in making those elections like inherently chaotic for everyone, right? So there's that. I think, one thing that I think people should really take into consideration is that like, regardless of when this goes into effect, it's going to be really hard to train people on this. Like, it's going to be hard to train voters to know that they need to bring these things when they register to vote because they haven't needed to before. The only state right now that requires that in any capacity is Arizona for statewide races. And it's taken them a really long time to educate voters and get them up to speed and registered in the way that we would expect. Right. So it takes a long time to turn a ship around. It also means that we all have to, like I say, we, like the, royal we, election workers all have to be trained in what an ID looks like and what's a valid one and what isn't, right? And you would assume that that's not difficult to do, but consider the number of IDs we're talking about and the number of different forms those IDs can take. It's not, people assume that if you have a photo ID that's issued by the state and you're going to a state office, that state office is going to be able to like scan it like a bouncer at a club that got fined last year for letting in minors, right? Like that's generally not the case. And so the bill expects a lot of expertise. It expects that like presenting this ID in person is going to solve problems instead of cause them. It assumes that when the ID is presented, the person who takes it is going to be able to tell the difference between that and one that's not valid or one that's totally fake or doesn't belong to someone, right?
It assumes a level of knowledge that probably should not be assumed. Right. Unless there's adequate training. Right.
Exactly. And there's not going to be, right? Like poll worker training is bad to begin with. This adds a whole nother very complicated layer onto an already pretty hectic day. So I think that like if this passes now or in 6 months or a year or whatever, and whenever the date for whenever the go date is, right? Like there are going to be problems. There are going to be a lot of problems. Ultimately, most of those problems probably won't disenfranchise people, but it's going to require a lot of attention from a lot of different places to ensure that that doesn't happen. And they'll probably pay that kind of attention because election workers usually do.
Right.
But people are going to fall through the cracks. Absolutely.
So, and I'm glad you brought that up because so since this really like realistically, it's not going to pass, right? So it's really more of like, there's like, what is this signaling, right, within our culture, and what are kind of the fault lines that this is probably bringing out? Yeah. And you mentioned just like, a lot about like the training that's going to be required, almost like this intention versus impact idea. We have a lot of great intentions, but what's the actual impact and the likelihood that, say, Louisa County, Virginia is going to be able to do the kinds of work and bring up the quality of training needed to actually implement this in any kind of serious way, in any kind of effective way. And I would love to hear your response on that. But what I really want to kind of hear your thoughts on is kind of the integrity. Like, what is this representing to voters right now who are seeing this? Why is this becoming such a big deal? I mean, we've talked about how Donald Trump has called elections into questions and things like that. But what is the tension? It's like people are so afraid of what? Someone who is illegal voting, someone who shouldn't be voting. Is that making a difference? Obviously, we talked about this before. It's not. Like you've said, like empirically. Mm-hmm. But I want to just hear your thoughts on that tension between the risk of someone voting who shouldn't be being able to vote versus the risk of people that should be able to vote not being able to because of what these kinds of regulations might create. Does that make sense?
It does. And actually that's exactly where I was going to go next. I mean, I think there is an assumption that because it is easy to register to vote, lots of non-citizens, some people say, no, I'm worried about all non-citizens. And some specifically say they are worried about illegal aliens, right? But it's kind of a distinction without a difference for this point, right? So like their concern is non-citizens are voting and they're canceling out, that's the language that they like to use, the votes of lawfully registered American citizens. And I think that logic is weird, right? Like it assumes that the vote cancels it out rather than augments it, right? Like it assumes some amount of ideological understanding, which I don't think we can. So, but if we set that aside entirely, right, their concern is, their voice matters in a space which it shouldn't. And it is taking away from the voices of American citizens. And I think that people of good faith can make really good arguments that that's true, right? The problem is that it isn't true not because the idea of someone who shouldn't be registered casting a vote doesn't cancel someone out, but because that doesn't happen. And we know that empirically. So like, let's consider Georgia. So in the last few years, like, especially the last year and a half since Trump has taken office again and started talking a lot about non-citizen voting being a scourge. A lot of Republican states have started to pass more laws that that the states would enforce to check for citizenship on the rolls, to audit the rolls for non-citizens, to require additional identification at the state level. So Indiana just did that last week, for example. But Georgia was one of the states, one of several, that in the last year has really thoroughly audited its entire voter roll to look for non-citizens. And so the state of Georgia did this. They went through a months-long investigation. They found fewer than 25 people in the entire state of Georgia. Right. So we're talking, and
which is totally insignificant, right?
So insane, like a state with millions of people in it. And like, we're talking 25 people. And so, sure, I like totally agree. Those 25 people shouldn't be registered to vote. Should the process that we use to ensure that 25 people shouldn't register to vote make everyone in this state do more work? Probably not, right? Like that doesn't make sense to me from a cost-benefit analysis perspective.
It's not a good trade-off.
Had Georgia come back and said, we found 7,500, right? That would suggest to me, even if that's a small number as as a percentage of Georgia's overall population, it would be a large enough number to suggest to me that there was some systemic problem, right, that we needed to plug.
Right.
And in which case, case, maybe a huge solution is necessary.
As opposed to just margin of error that you would expect. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And so in implementing this law, like in implementing SAVE, is the likelihood Georgia disenfranchises significantly more than 25 people high? Probably so. Even if the number is 300, right? Even if the number is 500 and it's not a huge deal and election administrators really pull it off, this is going to make it harder for them to do that.
You know, I want to just double check what you just said, because I think we just broke news, even if you didn't realize it. You said 25, not 11,780.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Yeah. Or 11,781.
That math does math. Yes.
Because if you did say 11,780, that would have been a little bit weird. Because Trump has been trying to find those votes, you know, since the last election. But and it seems like, since we're talking about Georgia, that he's still on this sort of like, I don't know, quest to kind of find these votes. And recently that they just sent like the FBI and the DNI person, who's Christy Noem?
DNI, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know why I get them confused. But yeah, they sent them to Fulton County. Like, I'd love for you to just talk to us a little bit about that, since we're already talking about Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, this was so fascinating. So, I mean, just for context, I was actually in Georgia in 2020 and 2021. The Georgia Secretary of State's office, for some reason, let me just follow Brad Raffensperger around. So, when Trump gave his speech, you know, at his rally saying that they were going to come down hard on Georgia, I was sitting next to the Deputy Secretary of State. It was a really surreal experience. So I have a really interesting, you know, I think I have an interesting perspective on this. And certainly it's interesting to feel like I've gone back in time. It's going to be 2020 forever, I think, probably. So last month, Georgia, the FBI raided a Fulton County facility where the ballots from the 2020 election were stored. And in addition to the ballots, other things like they'll call it tape. And it's just sort of like the receipt the machine produces when it does something, right? And so all of the documents associated with 2020 and how 2020 was carried out in Fulton County are stored at that facility. And so they went in and they took all of those boxes, about 700 boxes. It's important to know that no other county in the United States still has that material. Some still might, because they haven't gotten rid of it yet. But federal law only requires you to keep federal, voting materials for 21 months after an election. And then most states require it to be destroyed, because by then all audits would have happened. There's no point in keeping them. Storage space isn't forever. We don't have storage facilities everywhere in Fulton County. Most counties don't even have storage space enough to store one ballots and one election's ballots, and they have to use private storage facilities for this, right? It's a lot of space. We're talking the 700 boxes were 4 semi trucks worth of documents that they
holy smokes
drug out of there. And so, you know, this is an incredible amount of information. And so they took it all, and they haven't really said why. When the raid happened, the full search warrant and all of the justification for it was not initially released. Just the warrant was released, the top sheets. And eventually it was released. And the justification, and I'm honestly surprised that a federal judge signed off on this, the entire justification is a bunch of daisy-chained conspiracy theories that we could go through one by one, but that you've definitely heard about already and that have already been disposed, right?
Can you give us one?
So, for example, you know, they didn't have the right material, and they weren't printing the right numbers on the right ballots. And because they weren't doing that, that invalidates the entire count. There was some misprint of numbers, but it wouldn't invalidate an entire count, even if you did go back and audit it and figure out which ballots belong to which voters and trace them back to their source. At no point would anybody throw out a ballot for some of the errors that they're bringing up here. They're also talking about storage problems. They're talking about, conspiracy theories in which ballots disappear or don't match the recorded record of where the ballots should be, right? Like all of these things, even if they were not disposed of in a court of law, were disposed of thoroughly and with like absolute like detail in the media and by Fulton County, which put out just incredible numbers of reports on this. The state issued reports. The Secretary of State's office issued reports. Fulton County Board of Elections, like there are reports like you would not believe. And so those things exist. They've still taken all of these things away. The only thing you possibly could do with the information they've taken is attempt to retabulate the 2020 election. But they can't, because I don't know where they would get a scanner capable of doing that. They don't have one. As far as I know, they don't have one. I feel like I would know if they got their hands on one. They're really expensive. There are not that many of them. And also, let's keep in mind, right, like, remember 2020. I realize it doesn't feel like it, but it was a long time ago. Like, those ballots were manhandled, right? Like, keep in mind that like the ballots were recounted 3 times. The Fulton County ballots were stuffed into boxes. They've been rifled through by lawyers with litigation for like the litigation. The only reason Fulton County still has these ballots is because it was sued so many times. It's won all of these lawsuits, right? But
and it has to keep them.
So they have to keep them because there's a litigation hold. And so the Trump administration can take them, right? And so they did. But the end result of all this manhandling is that, like, you've seen paper, right? Like, here's a Post-it note.
I have heard of paper, yes.
It's crinkly, it moves. And if you go like this a lot, what happens to the paper? It gets weaker and weaker and weaker. These ballots can't be retabulated. Even if they wanted to, they would just fall apart. Like, I've seen them. I've seen the boxes. They're a mess. And I like, they're all in the places they're supposed to be in the boxes, but each piece of paper itself is a mess, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's just so amazing to hear the practical things, right? Like, hey, it even gets down to the material of the paper and how people don't think about that because when they're in a conspiracy theory, I think, right, oftentimes they're disconnected from reality. But I don't want to, or at least in that particular instance, I mean, we could look at the conspiracy theories, right, that have been debunked, but we've talked about that, and we could, produce more of that. If our audience wants that, let us know, and we'd be happy to do it. So, but I want to think about this idea that local elections, right, they're run by counties, and yet Trump has been, I don't want to reveal my bias too much. Everyone knows I'm not MAGA that listens, but Trump has said that we should federalize elections. And probably to his supporters that are diehard supporters, very, very vehement supporters, they probably see the raid as, hey, look, they found something. It's almost like showing, hey, look, it's proof to them that there was something that something went on, right? That something is a foul or a miss. Now, to the other side, though, it also seems like it's intimidation, right? This is what we're going to do if you keep messing with us. We have the White House or whatever. We have the power to come in and take these materials, do what we want. And so it's almost like sending these messages. And I'm just wondering, like, what are your thoughts on like this insanity that we have in terms of the election and then even federalizing? Like, what is he talking about? What would that look like? Is that even constitutional? If I don't want you to go outside of your expertise or where you're comfortable, but I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I would caution anyone from assuming that the existence and execution of a search warrant means that anything is wrong ever. I think that itself is a huge assumption that we make, right? They came in, they raided my neighbor's house. He must have the drugs.
Therefore, he must be guilty.
Right.
That's the presumption of guilt instead of innocence.
It could have been a bad tip, or bad information presented to the judge. There is 100 reasons that search warrants are carried out under absolutely specious grounds and then ultimately result in nothing. And so I think that is, and that's true regardless of whether we're talking about like elections or some kid who held up a liquor store, right? Like it doesn't matter. And so, you know, I think that's like a common sort of fallacy in American culture because we all like cop shows a lot. But so there's that, right? And I also think that if someone thinks that there's a there, then what I would ask them to do is go through the search warrant. It's not that long, and Google each of the names that are cited as experts, and you will quickly realize that these are not the people that are traditionally cited as experts in the court of law. Right. And they don't have to be admitted as experts for purpose of a search warrant. And this isn't a trial, right? The standards are way lower. You just have to show that they have something to say. They have a claim to make. And so that is what they did. So, you know, the search warrant is weird. You read it and you're like, that's weird. That was a weird thing that I just read. You could know not anything at all about this, but the tone and cadence of it are really weird. And so, you know, they're doing weird stuff all the time. This is one of those weird things. But I also think that, you know, the people who say that this is intimidation have a point, right? Well, actually, I'll say to the people who are like, something's happening, right? They probably will find something. They probably, like, they've got 700 boxes of documents in one of the biggest counties in the United States on an election day that constitutes several thousand temporary employees all doing the same thing at the same time. If you look hard enough, you're going to find human error. I am sure that they would find something, just as I'm sure if you went into Dallas County, which is where I live, and you took every single document from the 2020 election, if they still had it, they don't. But like, if you did, you could rifle through those boxes and I bet you'd find something. I bet you'd even find something that nobody noticed that technically constitutes a misdemeanor, right? Like, I bet you would.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the election itself was flawed. But for the people who are saying there's intimidation, I think that they're right to assume that that was the intention. I think that the image, as you say, the image of federal agents walking in with their FBI jackets and carrying boxes out of Fulton County, which Trump has been talking about for years, is a very powerful visual image.
Yes, it is.
It's going to be used over and over and over again in ways both intended to be in good faith and also bad. And so I think that that he knows that, right? Like, this is a TV president. That's not me like showing my bias. That is a statement of fact. And he understands the power of images. And so he got some. And so I think it is likely that that was the whole purpose of this. And I think it sets a really bad precedent for judges signing search warrants on these types of grounds to allow a president to have a photo shoot. I think that's really troubling.
I'm laughing. I keep muting it so I don't interrupt you, but just so our listeners know, I'm laughing.
It's funny. I mean, like,
I don't know why I'm laughing. You have to laugh or you cry.
It's a crazy thing that they did, right? And so, you know, we're calling other states and other big counties asking if they're worried, right? You know, like, and it has set people up to be a little bit freaked out. And I'll give you an example. And this is a weird story anyway. So 2 weeks ago, I took a day off and I got back, and that morning our other editor calls and she's like, okay, so our Arizona reporter is in a van that DHS is driving to an unknown location. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why did we allow this? And perfectly reasonable reasons. But DHS says to the whole of the press corps in Arizona, right? We have an announcement to make. Please show up at our DHS headquarters in Phoenix, and from there we will transport you to the location where Kristi Noem will make a statement. right? Like she's going to come out, she's going to make a statement, and then she's going to answer your questions about the statement. My immediate thought is they're going to round up all those press people. They're going to drive them to Scottsdale, which is where they ultimately ended up. And then they're going to raid Maricopa County elections. That's what's going to happen, right? That didn't happen, but there's a reason I thought it might, right? And like that concern is part of the point, right? And I think, you know, I think that this administration understands how to put on a show, and part of this, not that it doesn't have like immediate real world implications in Fulton County, like part of this is a show.
You know, one of the mantras I keep coming back to is from Charlie Sykes. You know, where he says like, "You're not the crazy one." Like, yeah. I'm always telling myself that it's like the self talk. I think it's really good for my mental health. But you know, staying on the crazy train, like I'd love to just talk about the redistricting thing, especially. I mean, like your state started it. So I love.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Can you just talk to us about, like, number one, how's that going in your state, and then we can kind of talk about maybe just some of the other areas where redistricting is happening.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's pretty crazy. There was briefly a court struck down the redistricting, and then it was put back up. There's like the candidates, I think, are the ones who have suffered the most at this point, right? Because it's not really clear where the candidate lines are drawn. And like, as I said, the primary is next week. I mean, like early voting is happening right now. So the timeline for this was really compressed. And it also means, you know, it has a lot of real implications for election administrators here and everywhere else, because, you know, I think we see redistricting and we get a little notice in the mail that says, here's your new district. Like that requires a human being in the county, like literally taking a map and drawing lines, right? And if those lines are a street off and you vote in a different county, you've been disenfranchised. You know what I mean? Like the stakes are really high. And so doing that this quickly is hard to do. And it has, as you said, set off kind of a flurry of this elsewhere. And so all election administrators are dealing with this sort of stuff in the places where it's happened.
Yeah, I mean, so they are trying to do that here in Virginia, which, you know, even as a Democrat, I'm not necessarily on the redistricting bandwagon.
No bueno
here in Virginia, but I love to hear, like, what sort of problems do you expect to happen both at the primary and even, you know, at the midterms?
You know, I think that I'm expecting the same kind of problems that we see every time there's redistricting, but on like a more, but I'm expecting more of them because, as I said, like the timeline for doing this has been really compressed. And so when we, like during times when we would see, you know, 5 people showed up thinking that they voted in that district because that's always the district that they voted in, and they don't remember getting anything in the mail telling them otherwise, like that's going to multiply pretty significantly. and that happens every time there's redistricting, right? Like this isn't something new. It's just in the middle of a cycle and no one was preparing for it. So, you know, I mean, the fact that no one was preparing for it also means that other parts of the system don't work as well. So, for example, Texas, the state of Texas, have we talked about the Texas voter registration system yet? Because
we have not, no.
Somebody else.
No, but I never thought I would say this, but please tell me about the voter registration system of Texas.
Oh. Texas
I can't wait.
Had intended to update its voter registration system. Badly needed technical advancements to team the Texas Election Administration Management System. So
let's go.
They really needed to update the system. It was planned so that they could roll it out before this federal election year, right? So that it could be like some local elections could use it to make sure it was working, and then we'd have a new one by November 2026 and it would be ready to go. Well, what does a voter registration system need in order to assign you to a precinct? They need your congressional district. What did they not have? Precincts, because there were no congressional districts. And chiefly, the system, team, did not even have a redistricting module in it. Like, they hadn't built it at all, because redistricting wasn't supposed to happen for several more years. So they prioritized the parts of the system that were the minimum viable product for carrying out the 2026 election did not include redistricting at the time that they set about this. And then all of a sudden it needed to. So this private company that's building the voter registration system, and all of the 254 counties in Texas had to just wait. And it's not done yet, because they had to help all of these counties. So 90 of Texas's 254 counties had their districts moved around. And in 90 of those counties, election administrators needed this system to produce new precincts for all of their voters, and it couldn't. And so they had to create it. And so everything else went on hold. And so now the system is having a really hard time churning out reports on who gets mail ballots because of redistricting. Like, this is a cascade, right? Like, flip a domino and then mail-in voting becomes harder. Like, it's all interconnected.
And it just shows you again that we say, like, politicians make promises, right? You can get up there and you can say, I'm lowering taxes. And everyone's going to hear, my taxes are going to be lower. This guy's amazing. Yeah. And yet, in order to lower taxes, something has to happen.
Right.
Laws need to be written. People need to approve it. People need to be hired. Things like these massive, complicated systems.
Yes.
Have to be done. And no one thinks about that. And politicians get to say it, not do it, because people forget. And then they tell you something else to be angry about, or they go and they raid a frickin', voting registration place and not steal. I shouldn't say that. What should I say? They take it. I don't know. And that's revealing my bias. They take the documents, use their authority in what I think is an unethical, wrong way to take all these documents that are not doing anything, but just proving a point and trying to intimidate. Now, again, that's my interpretation. But like you said, it makes a lot of sense. It fits the narrative. But thinking about redistricting, I'd love for you to answer this question. So it's kind of a simple question, but I think as we work through it, it'll bring out like the issues, I think, with redistricting, just to remind our listeners why it's so bad. And here's a question I would ask you. It's rhetorical, and also I'd like you to answer it, get your thoughts. Should voters choose politicians, or should politicians choose voters?
Oh, goodness. I think voters should choose politicians. That would be my preference, right? Like,
and why is that? Why is redistricting so bad is essentially what I'm getting at.
It takes away from the idea that the government is like for the people and of the people and by the people, right? Like, if the government is choosing the people and the people are not choosing the government, like that's not democracy. That's, I don't know, an oligarchy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is, but it's certainly not a democracy.
Oh, sorry about that. Hold on.
Oh no, my bad. I can keep going.
So here's, man, I'm really going to edit the heck out of this episode. Behind the scenes, Josh and I text each other on whose turn it is to ask the next question. Okay. So you don't see any of this. This is all.
And I was way too late. My bad. I'm like, oh wait, I really thought you would go longer on that question. I was like, she's got to go. And then I was like, oh man, you're done.
It just is. Yeah.
It makes sense.
So my last question to you is, just the last time we had you on, you had talked a lot about threats to election workers, misinformation, all kinds of just things that are just making it harder for people to, either one, help support elections, or two, even just go vote. I mean, now, I'm hearing that there could be ICE at polling places. I did read something today, though. Somebody from the administration had mentioned that that wasn't going to happen, but it's still out there. So I'd love to just kind of get your thermometer. Like, how are we doing as far as elections, going into the midterms or even further out?
Yeah. So, I mean, first I will say, we actually have a story up today about that, about ICE at the polls. So there was a call, the FBI hosted a call with election officials. That freaked a lot of people out. That's actually a normal thing that they do. So it shouldn't concern anyone. But on that call, the person who heads up election security for DHS said, like, unequivocally, there will not be ICE at the polls. And that is the first time a person in the administration has literally said that straight out. Caroline Leavitt has sort of like called it fake news a couple of times, but has never actually denied it. I will say, though, that like people should keep in mind that like because of the civil rights era and all the terrible things we did to people at polling locations, who is allowed to be in a polling location and who is not allowed to be in a polling location, and under what condition and carrying what items, say weaponry, are allowed to be near the polling location, that have been like extraordinarily well worn in courts of law. Like, these are not new, these are not different, these are not controversial inside of courtrooms. And so in the event that any of these people did present at the polling location, there are a whole host of groups that could very easily fix that quickly in court. And I think the administration knows that, and the administration doesn't want to just lose all the time, right? So there's that. But also, we literally do not have enough federal agents to place even one at every polling location in the United States. And given what we have seen of the organizational prowess of our federal agents in cities like ICE, I think that we can all agree that even if we tried, we couldn't get it done. So, like, there are logistical challenges, there are legal challenges, there are procedural challenges. The administration says they're not going to do it. There is no indication in my mind that ICE is going to be at the polling location. And I want to spell that out really clearly, because when people tell me they're worried about things, that's what they tell me they're worried about. And it is, if anything, in my bottom 5 worries for Election Day. So here are my worries. I do think that voting is mostly going to be okay, right? Like, I think that there are going to be, as there are every year, some pretty loud but extraordinarily isolated incidents at polls that are really bad, right? So last federal election cycle in Texas, a poll worker asked a man to take off his MAGA hat and he punched her. That's the worst thing that happened in the whole state of Texas during voting, right, to a poll worker. But after voting is a whole different situation, right? I am expecting an extraordinary amount of litigation. I am expecting Trump to contest the results. I am expecting people who are loyal to him to contest their own failures. I am expecting, I'm just expecting a lot of litigation and a lot of fights and a lot of misinformation to come about as a result of this. And I think that if you sort of like take a look back at some of the things we've already talked about in this conversation, he is setting up a situation in which he can very easily claim a few things, like Fulton County is wrong. Look, we rated them. Here's my photo. Now you can see proof that they're doing wrong things. Otherwise, we wouldn't have rated them. And they want their documents back. Why would they want their documents back? Why would you object to a search unless you have something to hide, right? Like, there are all sorts of things he can talk about there. But he can also use the failure of the passage of the SAVE Act to further his calls for additional litigation, right? The idea of the SAVE Act, even if it's totally implausible and would never happen, is that it is in theory in place by the midterms, right? Or like would be moving in that direction direction. If it's not passed, he gets to say, look at these people who didn't stand when I said that they should be protecting Americans during the State of the Union, and they also didn't pass the SAVE Act, and now look at all these Republicans who lost. They should file lawsuits. So I think that what we're building up towards is not any actual problem at the polls, but chaos in the days after.
I do kind of think that's what he, as in President Trump, does best, is sow chaos. I think he's, there are these creatures. I'm studying Genesis. Give you a little insight into my life. I'm a pastor, so I'm studying Genesis. We're going to be going into it this weekend. And there are these chaos creatures. God creates the big, and the whole point is that God, he has control over the chaos creatures, so they can't, and maybe that's the lesson for today. God, for us Christians out there that really truly follow Christ, that God has control over the chaos creatures ultimately. But I do kind of feel like he's kind of like a chaos creature, and part of it is sowing this chaos to be able to essentially insert the narrative that he wants to put in there.
Absolutely. And
I interpret it for people, right? No matter what. Yeah, that's what he's good at. He's a master at that, actually.
Yeah, he is. And I think the State of the Union is a really good example of that, right? Like he paints a picture of America as he wants it to be and not necessarily as how it is. And he asserts it as fact, right? If I say it, then that's your experience. Then that's sort of how he feels.
It's pretty effective. I mean, for some people, yes.
I think that elections, because of how chaotic they are right now and how stressful they are right now for so many people because of the place that they've taken on in American culture, it's a really good time to sow chaos.
It is. And it's like, I want to say to my friends, and I'll say this to my friends who are really doubting the election, go get involved and volunteer and do your part to ensure you know what I mean? The safety of our elections and the integrity of our elections.
County is going to throw ballots in the trash.
Then go be there.
Volunteer so that you can be in the room and make sure that doesn't happen. I would support that, right? That sounds great. Go to poll worker training. Go be the poll worker that makes sure that all of your Republican friends.
Be the poll worker in the mirror that you want the world to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. So, okay, here's my last question. So I want some hope though, right? We need hope, man. We need hope. So talk to me. How are our, that's hard to say, election systems? I know they're under stress right now, but are they strong? Where are they right now? What do you think?
Strong. I mean, I think they are stronger than they've ever been. Like the systems themselves, right? The technology that we're using with our elections, the voter registration systems, like Texas's problems notwithstanding, even in this state, it's way better than it was 4 years ago. You know what I mean? Like the technology.
That's remarkable.
And so have elections.
Well, that's so good. So what gives you hope?
Yeah. So I think what gives me hope is that election administrators are more clear-eyed than they've ever been before. They know exactly what they're walking into. Nothing that happens in 2026 is going to surprise them. Nothing, not a single thing.
That's amazing.
And I think the ones who are in office now know what they have signed up for and they're prepared to deal with it. I think one of the reasons that this is going to make it sound like I'm blaming them, and I'm certainly not. But I think that one of the reasons that there were problems in 2020 and even 22 with misinformation, like their ability to respond to it effectively, or in 2016 or in 2018, when we first started getting cybersecurity concerned, they didn't really know how to deal with that, right? They'd been in these jobs for 30 years. And at no point did anybody ever say, what are you going to do about the Russians to your county clerk? Nobody said that, right? And so they were not expecting to deal with this. They did not want to deal with this. This is not the job they signed up for. But most counties at this point have an election administrator that has stepped into office after 2018. And so these people do know about these things, and they are expecting to be asked about it. And so I think that because of that and only that, I am like, because of that and only that, the turnover has had some good impacts. I would still have preferred it didn't happen and think we would have been better off if it didn't. But now you know that the people who are stepping into this and choosing this in this time, they know what they've got their hands on here.
I really like that, because I agree. We need to get the message out. Our institutions are being tested, but they're strong.
Yeah.
And they're only going to be as strong as psychologically we're like, yes, they are. And that part of that is understanding how they actually work instead of how people with platitudes say they work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's why you watch this.
Listen to the show and go be a poll worker.
Yes, exactly. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on. How can people get involved with what you're doing to just kind of give them ways to connect with you and VoteBeat and all that?
Absolutely. Our website is votebeat.org, and you will find all 5 of our state websites from that page. You can sign up for our newsletters on that page. You can donate to us if you want on that page. So yeah, that's where they should go, votebeat.org.
Well, very good. Well, thanks so much again for jumping on the program with us, Jessica.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is fun.
Yeah, it's always a fun conversation. To our viewers, guys, check out the links in the description. Get involved with VoteBeat and check out everything that Jess is doing over there. And till next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Thanks.